Welcome to this free chapter of our Ultimate Lighting course. This is chapter 03, Fundamentals in Exposure, Part 2. For more information on the full 16 plus hour course, you can find the link in the description below.
Hello and welcome to this next lesson, where we continue to look at exposure, camera values, and how to set up an actually pleasing relationship for our image. So you remember last time we set this up, and one thing that I would really like to illustrate before we actually jump into things is, remember when I said that we can make things look the same even though we have different values? So to quickly illustrate, I'm going to go out here and we can see that our exposure now adjusts. And so if we're going to turn on min and max EV, you may have watched some YouTube tutorials or videos where basically someone said I want full control. I'm going to set this to 1 and 1. All right. And now the exposure is locked and it kind of looks pretty bad, obviously. So now what I can do is I can go in here and I can set my default value to 1 and we have this, right? And this basically looks exactly the same as what we had before. So even though my intensity is now 1, and I would need to recapture my skylight as well to basically get the same intensity of the lighting, but we're just looking at the background right now. So now my intensity is set to 1, and my exposure is locked at 1. But this thing is basically, that is not a realistic exposure value for a setting like this. So this would be more like an EV value that you would use for a nighttime. But we can make it work. And this is one of the things that takes a little time to get used to, but it illustrates how the values are really only depending on the relationship that they have with one another. And one of the most important things here again is that in real life the differences between the values is very large, so it makes sense to actually do that when we do our lighting as well, so we actually do get these proper differences between the different settings and interior versus exterior. We get the right contrast between sun and shadow. So that is very important. So if I just change this again and put this back to, I'm doing this off screen right now, but I'm just resetting the value, and we just wait for the exposure to kick in. And now this, not how would you know what is this number now? Because it can go between -10 and 20. And the easiest way to find out what number we are actually sort of locked in right now is to do this. And this looks like we are on probably 11 or something like that. Yeah. So if I would take this and do we're more here where the blue one is. So we would need to do sort of like this. And you can see now we're locked in, and it is the same as if we would set this to 1, 1 and just reduce our sky intensity. And that is what I meant with these values are sort of arbitrary. However, this will become a lot more important. So now the question is, how do we actually get our sun in here and have it work properly? First thing that I also want to do quickly is I just want to look at my room here again, and I want to rotate my sky, and I need to turn off the exposure debug view because otherwise I cannot really use the gizmos. And I kind of want that the sun comes from over here. Kind of like this maybe. All right. So how do we actually get this relationship? So now there's a few different ways of doing it. And I'm going to walk you through these quickly. So if I take my directional light, which is off, I'm going to turn it on, and you can see nothing has happened. And the reason for that is because right now, my directional light is actually set to 10 lux. And 10 lux is like literally invisible because of our exposure being like 12. So we need to crank this quite a lot to make it visible. So let's first of all go into our skylight quickly and just make sure that we have the latest and greatest in our settings, because see, we changed this. So like the shadow didn't match at all because now we're gonna have the light coming from here. So now this looks more correct. And then we go into our directional light. And now, how do we know what value to choose? We don't really. And also, like, if you do this, like, you slide it, it's like 150 lux. That is completely not physical. So what are we going to do? Well, we override manually. And we just try stuff. So we can do, like, maybe 5,000. And we're like, whoo, nice. Here we go. So now something really interesting. Like, it actually feels like this is not really bright enough if we like look at the surroundings, for example. So one interesting thing here is that, so this building back here, it doesn't really look white to me. It looks more gray. And this is probably like reflecting the sunlight. So the actual color is most likely something like what we see over here. And this sphere, this cube, excuse me, this cube has 50% gray value. So this is like perfectly medium gray. So now, first, let's see, that's actually, if we look, here's the sun, here's the shadow. So this looks lined up pretty well, so that's good. So again, is this the correct value? Or is this the correct value? We don't really know. However, what we do know is that we do need some sort of contrast. So having a value that is too low is probably not really gonna cut it. It's probably not gonna be super good. And we can see here we have something happening also. We have like some nice GI that we started getting. So this seems kind of cool. However, we're still also locked at 12, and 12 is like a pretty good exterior exposure. So now there's a bunch of really interesting things that we can kind of use to like figure this out. The first thing is we can use our gut feeling, and we can say like, how strong do I want this highlight to be? So because if I go like 35,000, for example, this starts hitting really good. And if I look here, that is probably white. So of course, we don't want this middle gray to look like the white here, which is like also hit by the sun. So what we're doing right now is we're basically just looking at what we have, and we're trying to find reference points in our sky HDR, which does have some really good values. And honestly, like looking at this, to me, and that is like my gut feeling again, and also my experience, this looks too bright. Like, I don't think that the stuff back there, which is kind of like grayish, like, I don't think it blows out that much. So maybe 25,000? So this is something where we can, again, decide based on gut feeling, and we can say like, hey, I kind of like this. I think this is like a good balance. And again, looks like this inside. I think like the bounce that we're getting is kind of nice, works. We're also starting to get some more fill bounce here. This is one of the things why Lumen is so great. Because in the past, we just had to like test bake this all the time. And we did not really know, like, was it good, was it bad? We don't know until we bake it. Now we pretty much know right away, which is a great thing. So in any case, so this is one way of doing it. However, if we remember what I said before, there's a lot of ways to do this that are actually derived from photography that help us. And one interesting thing, like people do in photography, they sometimes use something which is called like a light meter. And with a light meter, they actually measure the luminosity of something that they want to take a picture of. And then they get values, and these values tell them how to set their camera and how to expose the image. And there's one very, very simple rule that I really like using for me to like get me the balance that I want, is it's basically like midday, the sunny side of an object is 4 stops brighter than the shadow side. In the afternoon, it's like 3 stops. In the evening, it's 2 stops. And at some point, the sun is like very, very dim and only adds like a tiny bit of color, but not much sunlight anymore, right? So this is actually something that we can use here for our setup. So what we can do is we can go back into visualize, we can go into our HDR value, and now we just basically look at the shadow side here. And now we can see it measures an EV of 10.12 or 13. So that means that if we say like, okay, so this is like a medium afternoon, it might be that the sun is like 3 to 3.5 stops brighter than this, which means we should have around like 13.5 over here. So let's measure. What do we have? We actually have 13.5, which, now this is the thing, like, right, I told you I'm gonna go by my gut feeling, but since I did this so much, I kind of have a feeling for how these things should look like, so I kind of get it more right, like, just because I am that experienced. And this is like, the values is lining up perfectly. And now what you can do is you can say like, well, yeah, cool story, but I want to artistically tweak this, and let's just say we go with like 15,000. So now we're on 12.9, which is still like, now it's like proper like 3 stops more or less. And if I go back to 25,000, it's 3.5 stops. This is completely up to you. However, this is what, like, this contrast that we can see here. Actually, let's choose the median between these two and go with 20,000. So this is what like photographer found to be the perfect ratio of shadow and light for a setting like this. And that is one way to do it, right? So if we would like now, and this is the beauty of this, and this is why I love this approach so much. Like if I say, okay, let's do something completely different, okay? Let's let me just open the sky here quickly on the side. Let's say we're gonna do this thing. So here's a problem. If we look at the sky, the sun is actually not really there anymore. But we'll just assume for the sake of argument that the sun would be right here at the horizon, okay? So the first thing is like, okay, this was just about the relationship and not the actual values. So what do we have to do? We're gonna go in here into our page here, and something has just messed with the colors. Okay, so if we go down here, this is like, no, typical photographic scene at sunset, let's say 25 candela per square meter. That is actually really, really low, because that's not like 2,500 or like whatever, that's like 25, all right? So let's just play this through, and I'll show you how easy it is to actually make sense of this. So the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to check this shader, and these are, oh no, that's the wrong shader, sorry. This one, and we're going to turn this into like a parameter, sky texture. I'm going to save this. And in here, we just going to create a material instance, call it sky sunset. And now, obviously, the good thing, if we just like open this, we can just like override our texture here. no need to mess with anything that we built before. What is this saying? Okay, great. So this is a perfect example. So here you can see that for this texture, it says texture, right? And for this texture, it says texture cube. Now, why is this happening? So per default, when you download a sky like this, it usually comes as an HDR file. And when you import an HDR file into Unreal, it actually gets imported as a cube map. So it's basically like a three-dimensional texture, so to speak. And if you have a shader like this, a normal texture sample doesn't take a cube map. So when you put a cube map into a shader like this, you actually need like some math going into the UVs so you can project it properly and also be able to rotate it. I personally don't like that workflow a lot because it's just like a little bit cumbersome. So what I usually do is I resave the texture as an EXR, and an EXR is still internally an HDR file, but I can just drop it in, and then when I rotate the sky dome geometry, the texture just rotates with it, which does not happen when you use a cube map. So what we can actually do now is, let's see, do I have a version here that is already changed? And I don't, which is absolutely fine. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna open this, and it will not tell me like, hey, Photoshop. Okay, let's do this. I'll just drag this in. So now the only thing that we're gonna do actually is we're just gonna go and save a copy. We're in the same folder, that's fine. I'm not gonna call it copy, I'm actually just gonna call it EXR. And here, we just change this to OpenEXR. And again, it stays as an HDR file internally, no compression. I'm gonna hit OK. So now that this is saved, I'm just gonna drag this in here. And I will explain why this one is actually still useful, the cube map. So I'm going to open this, and you can see it has the VT. That stands for virtual texture. We don't want this to be a virtual texture at all, so we're just going to search here in the texture settings. And let's just like turn this off, and it does a little magic, and then we're good. I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to browse for this, so it's selected. I go back to my shader, and I'm just going to hit this, and now the arrow is gone. All right, beautiful. It is still doing something, though. Okay, now we're back working. Cool. So with that said, I'm gonna apply this shader now to my editor sphere. And you can see, kind of looks the same. We have all these ranges. So, but this is like clearly wrong now, because this is way too bright, and we don't have this exposure for such a low setting, because like we can see that there's lights in the inside of the houses, right? But these local lights, they actually have a very low intensity. They might be using like 1,500 to 2,000 lumen. And if I would put a light in here with that value, you actually wouldn't be able to see it. Because again, because of the huge range that these things have. So if I'm going to take like a point light here, and I'm going to change the values down here, you can change the units. I'm going to use lumens, because lumens is what you can find on the actual packaging of light bulbs that you buy. So you can basically say like, oh cool, I have this light bulb in my living room and it has like that intensity. So you can then just feed in the value here and you get the same thing. So let's say we go with like 2000. So did you see, like I actually did get something, but like not really like a lot. So if I'm like go up here, so we can like the light is clearly doing something, right? But you can see if I go out here, this by no means looks like what we can see over here with the lit interiors. And that again is because like right now the sky is actually having the brightness of a daytime sky and not of this actual setting. So I'm gonna actually keep this light in here. So that's gonna be interesting to see. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn back on my HDR visualization thingy. And if we remember, our sky like 25 candela per square meter. So now again we get into this field of like artistic liberty to a certain degree, right? So if I like measure, you can see like this is like 2100, there's like 4000 even on the brighter cloud. There's probably a lot more here, but we can rarely see it. And also super trick, like when the values are so bright in the image and you want to measure them and you can't see the numbers anymore because Epic doesn't have a dark outline for the text, what you can cheat is you basically look at it and it's like, oh no, I can't read the number. So you just go into the exposure compensation and you basically just compensate it down, and you see the value is still what it actually reads. So it is the value that you measure is not influenced by this at all, but now at least you can read it again. So that's my little hot fix for when I use this. Again, now, so where do we actually measure? And what I decide for myself in this case is, you know what, I'm just gonna measure in the center of the top of the sky dome. And that is like, again, artistic liberty. Like there is no rule for this, there is no, but like if I consider this to be an average, right? Like where the sun is, the sky is going to be the brightest, and opposite to the sun is going to be the darkest. So my brain just tells me like, hey, it seems logical to measure right straight up into the center. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to open my instance here again. And let me just slide this over. Can I like dock this over here? Yep, that's better. So now what we're gonna do is we're just gonna slide this down until we can read like 25 nits here. So let's do 200. Okay, so we're still at like 246 here. So let's actually do 50. Yeah, still too bright. What was it? 25. So let's actually go with 15. Ooh, now we're too dark. Let's go with 25. Okay, we're 30. I think 30 is fine for now. We don't have to match it like super exactly. So now you can see that this is a completely different story than what we had before. And now what we need to do is we need to adjust our actual exposure to compensate for this. So what are we gonna do? Well, we gonna go into our post-process volume, we ignore this, and now we're gonna set something that sort of looks good for us, and I'm gonna eyeball this. I'm gonna say it's probably gonna be around 7. And yeah, that's pretty good. Also, we can see that this looks completely broken, and that is because, of course, we haven't recaptured our skylighting. So we're just gonna do that. And now this is completely different, but also we have our problem that it still looks wrong because of the sun, obviously. So first thing for now, just gonna like turn off this light here, because we want to make sure that the stuff that we have is clean. So like now also like our sun, very, very bad thing. I think we can, let's rotate the sky a little bit so we can actually like maintain our sun rotation here, even though it's like, let's do something like this. Again, I have to recapture because it changed slightly. Now our sunlight is completely off. Of course it is. We have way too much brightness. We are also not flat enough, because like if we have a scenario like this, we would have some really, very long shadows, even though, again, I know we don't have shadows right now, but we just assume that there would be a little bit of sun. So one thing, if you click your sun and your gizmo is weird, that's probably because it's in local space. So you can click this one up here, and it cycles between local and world, so we can just drag this out so we can see this. And so what we need now is we actually need to like rotate this to be a lot like more flat. So that's the first thing that we're gonna do. Now I'm gonna switch it actually back to local, because now you can see I get the axes a lot better. First I'm gonna fix this a bit. And now what we wanna do is like we kind of wanna go like this. So it's not super accurate, but it is gonna be like a lot lower here, with the sun coming in like this. And then what we also need to do is we need to actually fix our colors and our intensities. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put this to 0. I will turn on again my visualize HDRI adaptation. So here we have like 3.6. All right. So if we say that we just go like one stop brighter, that would be like 4.6. And you can see we basically already have that. Because the thing is, we don't actually have a sun here. And the brightness that comes from this is basically already the brightest spot here. And we already have this almost one stop difference. But we can see there's a little bit left. So here we're 3.6, so here we're like 4.3. So we can add 0.3-ish with our sun. So let's do 10, 20. All right. So now you can see we added a tiny little bit of sun. So there's here our shadow. You can see it. So I remember this number, 20 lux. And 20 lux is actually pretty accurate for something that is like very late in the evening. So I'm going to do 200 so I can see it more. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to match the colors. And one thing that I really like to do and that I highly recommend to any of you, use temperature. Because don't go in and do like, yeah, sunlight is like this. Don't do it unless you do something that is A, highly stylized, or B, it's something that is like, I don't know, like a weird planet or something where like for some reason the sun is blue or whatever. Or you have like you want to emphasize on like a swamp feeling for like an isolated area, and you can like maybe like, nudge it towards something greenish or something. So of course there is some artistic freedom, but if we talk about like regular stuff, don't ever touch this. Keep it on white, hit the color, and you can see it already got a bit warmer because per default it's 6,500 Kelvin. And 6,500 Kelvin is the white point basically. So we're gonna check this. And since this is very late in the day, we can actually go down quite a bit. We can go to like 1,600. And you can see now this kind of like matches the feel. However, it is way too strong. So what we need to do again is we just go back here and we're going to do 20. And now you can see it does add a bit more, which is not perfectly realistic, but you can see the colors really look nice. And if we go back in here, we can suddenly see that, okay, this kind of seems more balanced. And then if we go to our point light here, actually, let's do like 1,200. That is what they usually are. Again, I'm actually going to turn on use temperature because most of the interior lights work with temperature as well. And a lot of the interior lights are actually very, very warm. That is something that most people don't really know because like our eyes also adjust for things differently. But especially when you do like photography, you'll notice that like a lot of the lights that we have inside our houses, our apartments, they're actually very, very warm. And they usually are between 2700 and 3600 Kelvin. So I'm gonna go with 3000 right now. And let's turn it on. And I need to get rid of this. So now you would say like, okay, that's still not like super bright, right? And that is usually like not what you like sort of get. And that is correct. So let's just make it a bit brighter by having more lights, which is also a very common thing. Because when stuff is dark, we add more lights. Because that's what we also do in our homes when it's dark. So I'm just gonna put this in. And like, you know, we ignore like all the shadow casting stuff and like all that for now. So this is what we have here. And now the fun thing is obviously that when you look from the outside, let me turn this off. We do have something that matches a lot better when we look at this. I think actually these lights are even like warmer, so that's like a difference. But we can see that our interiors are starting to do something as well. So now the thing is, this kind of like still looks very, very dark, and that's correct. And that is because right now the exposure that we have is something that is more pleasing for what we see outside. And again, what we need for this, and this is what games do, is we need dynamic exposure. So if we just go in here and we reduce this to maybe 5.5, now we're starting to get somewhere. And of course we get this becoming brighter, because that is very, very natural to happen. I'm just like getting really annoyed with these really hard shadows here. That's not very beautiful, not very natural in that sense. But like for now, that's okay. We can change that, but it's also not necessarily super important for what I'm trying to show right now. So here you can see that now we have this set up, and we could maybe even go to like 5. So now this matches really well, and if we look at something so bright, it will actually go back to something a little bit different, but again, it will not actually go up to the 7, because the default auto exposure always tries to aim for a medium gray average of the image. So if you would like to have this look darker than it did when like it did when I did this, but you still want to be able to have the 5 here for when you go into something, there's 2 ways of doing that, and we will look at these ways in the next lesson. So this is going to be it for this time. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next lesson.